Hello, this is Jim McKeeth, and welcome to this webinar, Cool Apps and Case Studies. Real quick about Embarcadero Technologies. We're an elite developer tools company that make elite developer tools for elite developers. We like the word elite, apparently. Our tools are used by over 90% of the Fortune 100 companies. We have over 30 years of experience making developer tools. Many awards have been won by our tools over the years. We have a real emphasis on performance, productivity, and platforms. Performance of your app, productivity of the developer, and helping you reach as many platforms as possible. Our developer community includes over 1 million active developers. Products include RAD Studio, RAD Server, Delphi, C++ Builder, and Interbase. And we support platforms Windows, Android, iOS, Mac OS, Linux, and Solaris. Currently, Linux and Solaris are only supported by Interbase. Well, Interbase supports all those platforms. But in the near future, we will have Delphi and C++ support on Linux as well. Real quick about me. I'm the lead worldwide developer, evangelist, and engineer for Embarcadero Technologies. And I have a bit of a sense of humor, so if things seem a little goofy at times, that's just my sense of humor coming through. I am a improvisational comedy performer with CSZ Boise, as well as a developer, host of a podcast at Delphi.org, and I invented and patented SKYPE to unlock. There's the patent numbers there. You can look it up. I don't get any money from anybody involved in that, but I do have that cool status that I can put that on my slides about me. So what's our objective today? We're going to look at some cool apps and some case studies for applications built with our developer tools. And part of this is to say, hey, look at this. This is really some really cool stuff that has been built here so that you can be inspired as to some of the potential of what you can use our developer tools to accomplish. But also, we're going to look at some of the lessons and some of the takeaways we can get from each of these individual applications. At the end, I'll summarize some of this, and then I'll also provide some of my own thoughts on the subject. So let's start with a closer look at SKYPE for Windows. This is a product that you're probably all familiar with. SKYPE is the most popular voice and video over IP platform ever. I didn't find a source for that, but I'm pretty sure that's true. It's been around for a long time, since 2003. And I remember when it first came out, it was huge and has just stayed pretty much the number one thing people use. Everybody's on Skype. I have my list of Skype contacts is huge. I use Skype more than I use my phone when it comes to having conversations with people. It was originally developed in 2003. It was acquired by eBay in 2005, and now is owned by Microsoft as of 2011. SKYPE for Windows the alpha started out in Qt. They found that their progress was really slow, and they weren't happy with the UI, and they knew they wanted to have a really good UI on here. So they switched to Delphi, and they found it was the most productive, fastest, and most efficient way to build their app and get a really good user experience on Microsoft Windows platform. It's now currently a combination of Delphi and C++. I've heard rumors that Microsoft has rewritten it, but I don't know that that's true. There's still a lot of the fundamental functionality of the Windows platform that's the same. And frankly, if it still works, don't break it, right? So it's possible it has been rewritten since Microsoft's acquisition of it, but when it was released and for a number of years, it remained to be in Delphi and C++. So what are some lessons learned from SKYPE? Delphi and actually C++ uses the same UI framework, VCL, which is what we use for SKYPE, is very productive for native user interfaces. It really is probably the best tool out there in that regard. For the longest time, Visual Basic was put up a good fight, but Visual Basic's really been deprecated. There's VisualBasic.net for building WinForms applications, which are .NET, but no one does WinForms for .NET for desktops. WPL is not really a native user interface. It's kind of its own weird thing. And again, it's not seeing a whole lot of uptake on the desktop. So really, if it comes down to building native user interfaces on Windows, Delphi is really the only tool out there, or the biggest tool out there for that. There are other tools, but they're just not as productive as Delphi by a long shot. Also, Delphi makes it really easy to combine with other libraries and technologies. So in the case of SKYPE, they used the C++ core for some of the internals of it, but they were able to wrap that all up in a nice Delphi UI. So they're able to get the best of both, right? They had some developers developing this core in C++ and other developers developing this great UI in Delphi, and they're able to leverage everything as they needed to. The other great thing about SKYPE is it continued to work for many years. I'm not sure what version of Delphi it was originally written in, but it was an earlier version. And they kept it in that version. They didn't bother upgrading because they didn't ever need any new features. They were happy with what they had. They just were using Delphi as your interface layer. And that's one thing that's great about Delphi is it continues to work. One thing that's great, and that I don't know that they're applied to SKYPE though, is that when a new version of Delphi comes out, you can generally move your code forward fairly easily to take advantage of the new features available in Delphi while still leveraging your existing code. So it turns your code into a good investment. So let's take a look at a case study. This one is on DIGIFORT's IP surveillance system. DIGIFORT has a wide variety of products, and I actually got a chance to meet Eric, the guy that leads developer, and I guess he's director of development. They does some really cool stuff. So this is a screenshot you see here of the DIGIFORT application. It does camera surveillance. So if you have cameras for like a security system doing surveillance, DIGIFORT can monitor all those, record those, and then store all that video footage in a database. So it stores information about which camera, what time it was, which direction the camera's facing, all sorts of stuff like that into this database. It also gives you remote device control through I/O controllers so that you can open and close doors, you can move things around, you can turn lights on and off and stuff like that. The other thing that's cool is it has camera analytics. Now, this is really neat. It can do things like look at video footage of a parking lot and tell if somebody is loitering in the parking lot. And if they are, alert somebody to come look at, either come walk through the parking lot or look at the video to see what's going on. So it can tell if, cars are coming in and people are getting out and leaving cars and coming back and getting into cars. Or if somebody enters a parking lot and wanders around more than they should and is not actually getting in or out of a car, and can have an alert for loitering. All sorts of really amazing things like that in the analytics. It also does license plate recognition. So as cars are driving by, it can grab their license plate and log that information. And biometrics, evidence collection. Apparently this is like a huge feature, which is where, let's say, the next day you discover, oh, there was a break-in, there was a robbery, something has happened. DIGIFORT can go back and pull all the data and say, okay, the robbery happened in this location. What cameras were facing there? What was going on? What evidence can we pull about that? And it can package that all up and make that available for the forensic investigation. The DIGIFORT Insight lets you control remote computers through DIGIFORT. So it gives you the screen control of that computer so you can control it. And then mobile cameras, one of their new features, where it can turn your mobile device into a camera that plugs into the DIGIFORT systems. So if you are out and about and you see something going on, you pull out your camera and you fire up DIGIFORT mobile camera, and it feeds your camera video feed into this robust system for capturing that video. So you could mount your camera if you need, hey, I need a couple more cameras, just throw up an iPhone, boom, there you go. Or it could be an on-you-go type situation as well. So a quote from Eric, the director of development: Delphi is the cross-platform tool I've always dreamed of. There's nothing that can beat it. So they started out using Delphi from the beginning. And when it came time to start doing mobile development, they went with Delphi. And if I remember correctly, they originally developed it with iOS, with XE4. And then when XE5 came out with Android support, they went add target Android, made a few changes, and look, they had an Android app. So like I said, I got a chance to meet Eric. Here's a picture of him while we were in the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, California. And he just got his pair of Google glasses and was trying them on here. I guess pair of Google Glass. I'm not sure, plural, and that was always weird. Anyway, his pair of Google Glass, and he's trying it on here for the very first time. Another quote from Eric: we chose Delphi because we could utilize the same code in order to generate software for both iOS and Android. This eliminated the need to learn new languages and gave us a much faster time to market. We didn't have to hire more people, which reduced the cost to the company even more. One thing else that Eric shared with me is that they actually originally started prototyping their app in Objective-C for iOS when they wanted to have an iOS app, because their expectation was, well, okay, sure, Delphi does iOS support, but they really felt like because they were streaming really high quality video in pretty much real time, that they would really need to have the best performance possible, and they figured they would need to have that native Objective-C performance. So they started down this route with Objective-C. They hired an Objective-C developer, and it's going along really slow. And they're like, man, this feels like a lot slower than it should be with Delphi. But they had some, prototypes, proof of concept stuff going on. They're like, well, let's do a comparison. So then they got out Delphi, built a prototype with Delphi, able to reuse most of that same code that they did when the original Delphi for Windows application, and found that the performance was just as good. They were way more productive with Delphi than with Objective-C. They could leverage all that same code, but the performance was the same between Objective-C application and the Delphi application. And that's because Delphi applications on iOS are native applications. So I sat down with Eric and talked with him, and these are some tips he shared with me. He uses a lot of transparent and semi-transparent PNG files in his user interface. So he just puts down T-image components with the layers them out and uses these transparent, semi-transparent PNGs in order to produce this really rich and nice looking user interface. He can stretch those components or stretch those images as much as he needs to, make them larger or smaller. And then he uses the T-float animation to provide smooth animations of things moving around. So if you see a video, which I will link to here, he has a few videos he's done of his user interface, and it looks really, really slick. His mobile interfaces does. And he's doing so much of that with the float animation and with images, transparent images. He also said, pause animations that aren't necessary or even off the screen in order to improve performance. So if you're doing something really important in the foreground, pause other animations. Even if they might, the user might notice them, still pause those, because that will give all that CPU on the mobile device, because mobile devices don't have as much horsepower as desktop devices to that foreground what you're doing. Also, anything that's off the screen, set it to visibility to false, and that will improve performance. And this is something I've gone to Android development conferences and iOS development conferences, and something that it's a tip that people talk about on all platforms with all development tools on mobile devices. One thing he said is real important is think about the mobile apps interface as a mobile app, not as, hey, can I cram my desktop app into a mobile app? There are tools that you can use to convert your VCL application into a FireMonkey application and try and run it on Android or iOS device, but that's not the user experience you want to have. A little bonus content here. We actually had Eric do a part of our devices and gadgets webinar with us. And so he's going to share some of the techniques he uses, the simplified, in his application to connect to IP cameras and IO controllers. So now we're going to take a look at IP cameras and IO controllers. IP cameras are network connected cameras. They're used in security and surveillance, whether it be at your home or maybe in a business, or maybe you're some sort of spy and you're mounting a camera someplace and you got to keep track of somebody. IO controllers, on the other hand, are network connected switches. They are connected to the internet and they're used to control physical devices, whether it be gates, cameras, or alarms. So with the demo for this is Eric Bonalla, and he's actually here with us today to do question and answer, and I hope I got his name right. If you haven't seen his other videos he's done of his new mobile app written with Delphi XE5 that runs on both iOS and Android, controlling all sorts of digital video cameras and gates and alarms and stuff like that, really should check those out. But here's a quick demo of basically everything he does for you right here.
Hi, my name is Eric. I'm from DIGIFORT, and today I will show you how to integrate your application with IP cameras and I/O controllers. An IP camera is basically a small computer with Linux operating system that sends compressed images through the network. Most IP cameras, they provide us an API that allows us to get the images from it and control it. As this is a network device, it will have an Ethernet port, that we can communicate to it. And this other camera also provides us with an I/O ports that could be used to integrate with external devices. But that will be covered with the I/O controllers. The I/O controllers here are used for integration with physical devices such as a gate, doors, anything that you can turn on and turn off. And as it is a network device, it will have an Ethernet port, of course, but it will also provide you with some inputs and output ports that can actually control the physical devices. This is an example of I/O controller, and this other one is another I/O controller from another manufacturer that provides an HTTP interface, very easy to use, that we are going to show you throughout this presentation. This is an example of a real-world app developed with Delphi XE5 that is already published on Google Play. With this app, we can view live cameras and control devices such as opening and closing a gate. I will show you now a very easy way to get live images from IP cameras to use on your apps with very little code. An IP camera is just a computer with a Linux operating system that sends images through the network. Those images could be H.264 video, MPEG-4, H.263, and Motion JPEG. Here I'm going to focus on Motion JPEG because that's the easiest compression to handle. H.264 and MPEG-4 would require a specialized decoder to view those images, but with Motion JPEG we can do everything from Red Studio. Okay, I have a couple examples to show you. This first example is a very simple program showing you how to grab a static image from the camera. Basically, I have an HTTP client and now my program is written on this button. What I do is request an image from the camera using this URL that it is specific to this camera model and load on the screen. That's a very simple way to get an image from the camera. And of course, if I do a lot of requests, I can show a live video to the user. This is not the best way to get the images from the camera, but that's the easiest way. I will show you now a more elaborated example that uses Motion JPEG. Motion JPEG is just a sequence of JPEG images. Basically, I will do a video request to the camera and it will start sending those images to us. To handle this sequence of images, we need a parser that will locate the JPEG images from the string, extract, and send to decoding. Okay, here my parser is written here. That's just a routine that will analyze the received data. We'll search for the start and the end of the JPEG. We'll decode the JPEG and load on the screen. Okay. This ugly thing here is because we are not using multi-threading, and since the indie components they are blocking. I need to do that so my interface will not get hang. Okay, but the best way to work with indie, if you are working with this component here, is to use with multi-threading. Okay, so basically here my button, I will just request the video with a different URL. That's the URL for video, and when data is received here, I will get these events and I will process the buffer. Okay, let's see how that works. Okay, I'm getting live video now from the camera. If I activate something from there, you can see very easy to do. All the source code will be provided for you any reference. Using I/O controllers, we can integrate a large variety of physical devices to our application and do actions such as turning a light or air conditioner on and off, opening or closing gates, all remotely. To do that, all we need is a network I/O controller such as this one, and those devices usually provides us an HTTP interface, so we can just call an URL and we can drive some actions. Here in this example, I will show you how easy it is to control this device using the HTTP component. So for these three buttons here, I just have the same code that's just call the action that I want from the device, okay? And let's see how it works. So turn on the lights. That could actually be the lights from your house, from your company, anything. Turn off and start the cooler. See, with just 4 lines of codes, see, I can integrate with a physical device very easily with Delphi. And now I want to show you a real-world application for this kind of integration with external devices. With this app, I can open and close the gate from my company. See? This was all made in Delphi XE5 using standard FireMonkey controls and INDI communication components. I'll just close the gate. And that concludes my presentation. I hope you enjoyed, and to know a little more about DIGIFORT, please visit www.digifort.com. You can also view the video that I made showing DIGIFORT mobile client. To find the video, just look for Delphi surveillance in YouTube. It will be the first video to show up. Thank you very much.
Here's a picture of Eric, David, and I when he was down visiting for that webinar. Now, he's talking about there, he's using XE5. Since XE5, we've actually made a number of improvements. There are the Internet of Things components now that make it easier for integrating with connected devices like he was showing there, as well as the new native HTTP components and the REST components. All that stuff's new since XE5, which makes a lot of stuff he was showing there even easier. Also, one thing is, Eric, the reason he wanted to get the Google Glass was because he actually built a client for Google Glass, so that the idea being that a security guard or somebody could be going through and they could run the mobile client on the Glass and see all the video feeds through the system on Google Glass, as well as the video camera from the Google Glass could send the images, the video it's capturing, back in as well to the centralized system. So it was kind of the best of both worlds. You know, you ever see the movie where the security guard goes out on patrol and someone sneaks up behind him and hits him on the head? Well, not anymore. That's not going to happen, because not only is the security guard going to be able to see around corners because he has Google Glass on and can see all the video feeds, but also as soon as he gets hit on the head, well, the rest of the security guards know because his video feed falls down. So Eric's doing great stuff. I thought I had a slide in here that talked about it, but their technology is used in like 80 different countries all around the world. Probably one of the top video surveillance companies around, and it's written in Delphi. So let's talk about a case study about WIDEORBIT. And actually, interestingly, I used to work for WIDEORBIT years ago. Great company. I really enjoyed working there. They're based out of California, San Francisco. They were founded in 1999. Their main software, WO Traffic, is used by over 3,000 television and radio stations. It was also used by many major media networks, and you can go to that URL down at the bottom, company/customers, and check out a list of all the companies that use their software. But one of the biggest ones out there. And interestingly, when I was working at WIDEORBIT, I discovered that a number of the competitors in the US as well as abroad also use Delphi to develop their software. There were a couple other ones that was actually kind of interesting that had switched to .NET or Java or something like that, and they went out. They went under. They were gone. They couldn't keep up. So the ones that stuck around were the ones that were still using Delphi, or at least that was the lore of the time when I was working at WIDEORBIT. So there's a quote from William Offman, which I used to work with him. He said, in 2000, we created our first product in Delphi, WO-Traffic, with 8 developers and SQL Server. Today, we have 60 developers working on Delphi. And I love this quote here from Anders Olsen. He says, it's simply mind-blowing that Delphi allows our team to develop for Win32, Win64, OS X, iOS, and Android with the same compiled code, even when the code is 20 years old. That's really amazing. And it's one thing I find a lot of people doing is that if they have some of that core business logic library code, they're able to reuse it on different platforms. So when they move to iOS or Android, they're able to reuse that code. And for example, with DIGIFORT, Eric, he said that they were able to take their core libraries, their core code functionality that works on those different platforms and use it on, or it was originally developed for Windows, and use it on iOS and Android. So here's some lessons learned from WIDEORBIT. Some of this is from their case study, and some of this is from my experience having worked there. But they use a multi-tier architecture to allow for scalability. They have multiple different middle tiers that they use. They also use a REST style APIs to support scaling and cross-platform development. And they make use of many different third-party components, both commercial and open source. Also, one thing they do, and this is something I previously had dealt with and was kind of complicated, is occasionally you'd have different forks or different versions of your program, and one would use one set of components and one would use a different set of components. And it was complicated to maintain those. And this is not a unique problem to Delphi. I was working with in C# for a while, and we had the same problem there. I had a different version of the third-party component library than the other developer I was working with, and it was created all sorts of messes. So one thing they did at WIDEORBIT, which I really like and something I recommend for people in that situation, is everybody had multiple virtual machines. So you'd have a virtual machine for version X, right? And so X.1, X.2, X.3, et cetera, would all use that same virtual machine. And so if you had to go back and fix a bug in an earlier version, you would go back to that earlier virtual machine. But then when you release version Y, well, that's a whole new virtual machine. Maybe you fork that virtual machine or whatever it needs to be, and it has the new third-party component libraries in it that may or may not be compatible. So at this point, the code has made a significant change, and so it's no longer, the development environment is no longer compatible. You've gone to a newer version of Delphi or whatever the case may be. And so you have the different virtual machines. So that's able to keep that older one archived. And then when you go back to fix something, because you got one customer that hasn't upgraded yet, and you got to go back and fix a bug for them, well, it's still there. You just fire up that virtual machine, and it's just like you left it. So as Anders mentioned, they were able to take some of their code that was 20 years old and move it to mobile devices. And that's a great learn there, is don't rewrite what works. If you wrote code 20 years ago and it's still working, keep using it. You're going to find that over time, you're going to do bug fixes and refactorings on it. And that's just going to make that code that much better, that much more refined. But you don't have to throw it out. You don't have to rewrite it to tackle new platforms or to move forward with new features. So here's a new case study with Inline Software, the makers of FL Studio. And this is actually a product I'd seen people used and loved, and they would tell me about it, how great it was. And I didn't realize it was written in Delphi for years. FL Studio is, now I've seen their statements from FL Studio and Image Line Software say it's one of the more popular digital audio workstations. But looking around a little bit, I'm pretty sure this is the most popular one. If it's not, it is really, really close to the most popular one. It's a digital audio workstation. I'll show you a little example of it. But it's what musicians use to create their music today. Examples, some of the musicians there, over 2.5 million lines of code, 300 assembler functions for the digital signal processor, and it's installed over 30,000 times per day. This is hugely popular software. Like I said, if it's not the most popular digital audio workstation, it is close to it. Here's a quote from the CTO and founder. It says, "For native development, Delphi is my first choice." Here's a screenshot of a fantastic setup here they've got going on. This is actual screens of the software running across 6 different displays, and then a touch screen down at the bottom for the controls of it all. This is what people are using. I've seen videos of different artists using FL Studio to compose music, and this is the kind of setups they have. Having a product that runs natively on both Windows and OS X without customers having to jump through hoops has the potential to grow our customer base significantly. So FL Studio was originally written in Delphi for Windows, but now with the OS X support that's been rolled out, they are looking at porting it to OS X, Mac OS, and make it available to a whole new set of users. Here's a short little demo I'm going to show you here. One thing about FL Studio is almost all the controls, or I guess all the controls, the entire interface is owner drawn. This is all custom components, all things they've done in order to get the exact look and feel they wanted to have. So there's plenty more examples out there of artists using FL Studio. If you go out to YouTube and do a search, you will find lots of examples. Some of them over an hour long of an artist saying, "Hey, I've just got the song in my head and I want to get it down into musical, record it now, or compose it." And they'll sit down and use FL Studio and just go through and put it all together. There's so many add-ins and plugins for it. It is a huge, amazing platform. So here's a few lessons and commentary on my part as well. I will, admit to some commentary here, but on FL Studio. So in the case study, they talk about how they love the fact they can put down a button and write a code to make it makes it really productive, so they can get things done quicker. That's something that's really important with Delphi. But also, Delphi makes it easy to do inline assembly calls and call Windows Platform APIs. So this is one of the things that's great about Delphi is you have this high productivity, drag and drop a button, click it, write some code especially at the higher level RTL and VCL, layer. You get a lot of productivity down to without needing a lot of code. But Delphi gives you the ability to reach down and grab those Windows API, to write inline assembly code on Windows, and get everything exactly like you want it. One note, though, is that the platform APIs lock you into a single platform. So it's best to isolate those into library code that can then be substituted out. I did a skill sprint on conditional defines and platform services a while ago, where I talk about some best practices around that. So check that skill sprint out if you want more information on that. And one thing, they found an article where they're talking about they're moving it from Windows porting to OS X, and they talked about the fact that they have a lot of platform API calls, so they had to deal with those. With FL Studio, like I said, the entire user interface is custom components and user drawn. And they did that because they wanted to have that exact specific look and feel. It looks like a mixer that a composer would be used to. And so it gives them that look and feel they're looking for in order to make it easy for them to transition to using the software as opposed to hardware, which they used to use years and years ago, right? So that focus on user interface and ease of use is a big thing about what made FL Studio such a huge success. So let's talk about our first cool app winner, which was 1Password for Windows. 1Password for Windows. Now, there's a many password identity security management software packages out there. 1Password's always been at the top of the list for most popular, highly recommended, most secure packages out there. It will store all your passwords, pins, codes, documents, credit cards, etc. It's identity management. It's interesting, when we started the Cool Apps contest, this was one of the first entries. I can't remember if it was the very first or one of the first. And we're like, hey, we got an entry, 1Password number. It's like, oh my goodness, I've been using 1Password for years. I didn't know it was written in Delphi. So I did an interview with the guy that wrote it, Stefan, and it was really very cool. This is what I use now. I'd been thinking about switching to it for a while. I'll be honest. I was using a different password manager, and some things about it I didn't like. And I was like, I was thinking about switch. And I was looking at all different ones. I was thinking, I might switch to 1Password. Looks like a pretty nice one. And then I heard it's written in Delphi. I'm like, okay, that does it for me. I'll switch. Although I'm using it on Mac and iOS as well. And their Mac and iOS version pre-exist Delphi support for those platforms. So they're not written in Delphi. Here's a screenshot for the 1Password for Windows user interface. A few notes about it. Like I said, its Windows version is written in Delphi. The other platforms were written before Delphi supported those platforms. Even the browser plugin, though, which I was surprised I didn't know you could do this, it was written in Delphi. It uses a large variety of security libraries for maximum security. There's a white paper you can check out there, as well as I have a blog post that covers a list of some of the components that they're using. I'm not sure if it was all of them, but quite a few of them. There was a few tools, though, that they use in 1Password that I think are worth mentioning here. Eureka Log is a diagnostics and reporting tool. It captures unhandled exceptions, hangs and leaks, etc. Can create stack traces and bug reports. It's one of two really popular ones. Actually, probably, I'm going to point out MatAccept, but there probably are others out there besides Eureka Log and MatAccept. Those are probably the two more popular ones. And like I said, now that I've said that, there's probably a third one that's even more popular, but it's slipping my mind right now. Final Builder is a fantastic build management software. If you are building software that you are making releases from, you need to have an automated build process, because it never fails. If you're not doing an automated build process at a dedicated build machine, sometime you're going to do a build and you're going to do something different. If there's user intervention in the process, you're going to make a mistake. You're going to do something wrong. A different user is going to be involved, whatever it is, and something's going to be wrong with that build. So you definitely want to have automated build process. Final Builder's one of the better tools out there for that. You can do it with batch files in MS Build with a RAD Studio out of the box, but Final Builder's a great one for that if you don't want to have to edit all those files yourself. InnoSetup is a great free setup builder. jrsoftware.org, where you can find that one. It's free. It's really, really powerful. It's used by a lot of software out there is installed with InnoSetup. It creates automated installation and uninstallation packages so that users can easily install and uninstall your software. There's also an IDE integration available. It's not free, but it looks pretty slick there at rad-installer.com. So another cool app winner, EARMASTER. And actually, I think it should be all one word, EARMASTER, without the space in there. My bad. And here I've repeated the bug, but you can see on the box there, EARMASTER, no space. So EARMASTER teaches sight singing, sight reading, musical theory, all sorts of stuff around being better musician and better singer. I'll be honest, I'm not a very good singer. I don't have much rhythm. I've always been rhythmically challenged, and I downloaded EARMASTER for iPad and started playing with it, and I was getting pretty good. I don't know that I'm great, and I need a lot more practice, but I definitely saw an improvement. My wife was impressed. She's like, wow, I can't believe you're actually on note now. So it actually has pitch. You can tell if you're on pitch for notes. You can tell if you're doing rhythm right. all sorts of stuff, the kind of stuff I need just to be able to not embarrass myself completely when I try to sing. It has 3,000 lessons made by music teachers. So there's EARMASTER for Windows, Mac OS, and iPad. They said there's not really a market in Android yet, just because it's a tablet type software, and there's not really a huge market or a huge amount of Android tablets out there. But they share 97% of their code between those three platforms, which is pretty cool. That's one of the things that's great about Delphi and C++ Builder's multi-platform approach. They do use, on iPad, they use the TMS's ICL native component library, which is a third-party component library that gives you actual native components all across the board for on iOS. Now, they started with this before Delphi got the native components in FireMonkey, so a number of the components in FireMonkey now can be native OS rendered instead of software rendered styled. So, but the ICL still adds a number of other components as well. They do also include some custom FireMonkey controls on their iPad application as well. Here's a screenshot of both the Windows and iPad version. So that's where they're doing the, on the iPad, that's where they're doing the pitch matching, which was what I was doing, although I was just like one note version. I was just starting out. So here's one note that said is they used a couple of plugins, IDE plugins, when they're developing EARMASTER. And you see I got the spacing correct on EARMASTER here. CNPAC and Model Maker Express. And I think they're actually Model Maker Express, the Code Explorer. I can't remember actually which one they were using for sure. But there's a few different products by Model Maker Express. You can check those out there, modelmakertools.com. There's Model Maker Express and Code Explorer. Code Explorer is an IDE plugin, whereas Model Maker Express is a little bit more robust of a tool. Provides structural highlighting, productivity enhancement, refactoring, etc. CNPAC is a really popular collection of IDE wizards, similar to GExperts. For the longest time, man, GExperts was my go-to IDE add-in, but now I know a lot of people are switching over to CNPAC. So if you don't have an IDE plugin yet, apparently CNPAC is like the one everybody is using. All the cool kids have. It's open source. You can get it at cnpac.org. And check it out. It's a great IDE add-in. Adds lots of cool little features that you wish were built into the IDE already. And the great thing is it gives you an option. You can like, well, I'm a GExperts guy, I'm a CNPAC guy, or I just like the IDE the way it is. It gives you that maximum flexibility. Flossapender is another cool app we have. It's a descrambler and anagram finder. It uses a custom algorithm to calculate the flossapend value for a word. That number is, my understanding of it, and I haven't gone through and dived through it completely, is independent of the order of the letters in the word. And so that means you can quickly and easily descramble it. One of the reasons I included this one is this is written in C++. Just happens to be in C++. I don't think there's any reason it needed to be, although it's possible that the developer was easier to implement his algorithm in C++.
Hello everyone, today I am showing off my application designed for the Android system and the Windows system. The application is called Flossapender. It is a word descrambler as well as a single word anagram finder. Here we have the biggest word in the English language that's scrambled here. You may know this word as pneumono ultramicroscopic silicovolcanoconiosis. First option we're going to choose is to find every word that has the same length as the word in this box, which in this case is just going to be 1, right? So we click on Descramble, and look how fast it found it. It descrambled that many characters in an instant. So it's a pretty fast algorithm that's being used behind the scenes there. If we were to find all words within the text, we'll put a minimum length starting of, let's say, 5. And we'll click on Find Them. And there we go. We just found 28,042 words within this text here. All the 5-letter words. So you see there's quite a bit here. And as you keep going down the list, it just keeps getting longer for the number of words. Let's see if we can go down here to the end. 45 letter mark, we have the original word pneumono ultramicroscopic silicovolcanoconiosis. Nothing in between there, and let's see, no, 22. Here we go. There's a 19-letter word, microencapsulations, post-millenarianism. Millenarianism? Yeah, anyway, some big words there. You can see how quick it descrambled that thing. It's pretty fast and efficient algorithm there. Let's go back to one word, and we'll just put, let's see if we even have a real word here. Descramble. And oh, okay, let's put some, you know what, let's do this. We'll close. We will launch the application again. This will show off some of the load screens. Here we have the load screen, a splash screen, and the actual app comes up with a default word. Let's go ahead and descramble that. And you can see down 6 words. These are all anagrams for this word here. And of course, you can go back down and say find all the words that are 5 or more. Click find them, down 212 words. And looks like our longest word is 8 letters long. We've got several of those. And then we have, for the final output here, we're showing what our flux append value is. And that's basically the value that this word makes up, which under the hood is what it uses to match other words in the dictionary. And we'll get to that later. Flux append basically means flux and oxynalipilifications, which is the full word. And then flux append is the shortened version of that word, which means the same thing. And so this is called flux appender. All right, if we go to the designer here, we've kind of got a system here for our loading screen and our splash screen and then our main screen. I use what they call a T-scaled layout, which is this whole thing here. I just drop it on the form and then I drop components onto that T-scaled layout. This one's the scaled layout for the loader. Then you have the scaled layout main, which is where all of your drop box or edit boxes and buttons show up on. And then you've got the scaled outer, which is what the other two go inside. This seems to work pretty good. Let's go take a look at our descramble function, shall we? Here we have our descramble function. All right, the first thing we're going to do is get a pointer to our dictionary. For our Android, we've got our dictionary, several 100,000 words. It's a pretty big dictionary there. Get our dictionary, and then we get our flux append value from the edit box. And once we have that flux append value, then we can start searching our dictionary for the next matches. I won't go too much into the structure underneath. It is the fastest word descrambler that I've ever been able to see. It'll also do longer words. As you can see, it did the longest word in the dictionary, which was the pneumono ultramicroscopic silicovolcanoconiosis. Most other word descramblers won't let you enter in more than like 11 or 12 characters because their algorithms will take too long to descramble it. Okay, so we have our find words function, which tries to find all the words within the text. And that's done by getting our flux append value again, and then just looping through and finding all of the next flux appender matches in our dictionary. A few little for loops in that one. Pretty handy little development environment. It is much easier than other compilers I've tried to use, especially with the design interface. And it's always getting better. It's one thing I have liked about Embarcadero is they've been working pretty good at bringing everything up to speed with all of the different applications out there, smartwatches and smartphones and things like that. So, good job, guys.
I'm actually curious if he has maybe written in a paper on how to do the flux append algorithm, because it looks really cool. It's neat how fast it is. I've actually used to be into some word games on my mobile device, and I had some word descramblers and anagram finders, and they were really slow. So flux appender is much faster. That's quite impressive feat there. So we're going to talk about another cool app winner. This is FRAMEFORGE Previs Studio. This is a 3D pre-visualization software for storyboards. And this one actually has a Technical Achievement Emmy Award that it's won. So not only did it win our Cool App contest, but it's actually won an Emmy as well as some other prizes as well. It's used in all these movies and shows you see here, as well as many, many others. Really cool stuff. And I've actually, Orphan Black, the last one on the list there, is one I watched quite a bit of. I haven't caught the latest season, but it uses that show. The premise of the show is the main character is a clone. And so there's lots of different clones of her that she's interacting with. So they're all the same actress. And the show does a fantastic job of her interacting with her clone self. And I was always struck by how amazing it did with that. And knowing that it uses this FRAMEFORGE and seeing how FRAMEFORGE works now, it's like, okay, that makes sense. Now I know how it could do such a good job of her interacting with herself because of the cool stuff that FRAMEFORGE does. So here's a little couple snapshots of the FRAMEFORGE software. What it does is it allows you to create these 3D models. So what you see down there at the bottom is a 3D model. And then you can have different cameras set up for that 3D model. So the really cool thing is it lets you have everything set up exactly like you would in the production studio. And that's how they actually won their Emmy, is it was in Downton Abbey was using it. And they had this really complex shot because the shot was going to be interleaved between two different sets, but to look like it was in the same location. And they had a really tight spot they had to put this camera in. They're like, oh, I don't even know if we can get the camera in that angle, in that spot to get this shot. And with this software, they're able to show that they could and that it was going to work. So this screen here, you can see the how the software set up is like a movie studio. And down at the bottom, you see have these custom controls that he's made to make it really easy and really intuitive for the kind of interfaces that a would be done with a camera. So you have the idea of dollying, which is moving the camera around, crane, which is raising the camera up and down, zooming the camera in and out, pan, tilt, roll, changing the f-stop, etc. So it's really neat, and I did this great video with him. So check out the link. If you go to I have the link at the end that takes you to the blog post, and you can go and watch the video where I talk to the developer and he shows how this works. And wow, I was really blown away and impressed by this software and how it works, because it's really neat because of the way you're able to visualize how everything's going to work and some of the neat things they do with this. You can actually have it interleave between the different shots you put together for your storyboards and render an animation of the scene as well. Really neat stuff. Very cool. I was a big fan. So a few final notes, my observations about some things and about what I've learned over the years as a software developer and from these cool apps and case studies. One question I have, and that people ask me this sometimes, is where's Delphi used? Is there one spot it's used specifically? And the answer is it's really used everywhere. All the time I see all sorts of new uses. You know, here we just saw a huge variety of different situations, different types of software where Delphi is being used. And this is just scratching the surface, really. I find it's especially common in vertical markets, like, for example, WIDEORBIT and FRAMEFORGE. This is very narrow niches of needs of software, but this is expensive software in those niches. This is specifically someone has a need to get filled and they're going to grab that. And I find that's frequently a result of non-developers, someone that has a background in something besides software development, having an itch to scratch. And they're like, oh man, if there was software to do this. And so they get Delphi and they make the software to do that specific task. Although frequently it's also people with background in development as well are using it. So it's really used across the board. It's a real popular choice with integrated software vendors as well as members of the Association of Software Professionals. Across the board, hobbyists, professionals, enterprise development, it's really used in all camps. So this is another question I find myself asking myself. I find I'm asking myself this question a lot, when are people using C++ Builder versus Delphi? So this is not hard and fast rules, but just kind of some general observations I found. And this may be exactly the opposite of your experience. But I find that C++ is especially popular in industrial automation settings where people are integrating with some sort of industrial systems. Now, that being said, I've actually visited some places that use Delphi in exactly that situation. There was a company based out of Brazil that was similar to like FedEx or UPS, that was an international shipping company, and all their software was written in Delphi. This huge floor of sorting packages and scanning barcodes and stuff, and these boxes are flying at high speed, and all the software is controlled by Delphi, and they were showing us, introducing those developers and showing us the interfaces and stuff like that, all written in Delphi. So yeah, C++ seems to be a little more common there, but Delphi is popular there too. Sometimes it's a regional preference. I know some regions, for example, I believe Japan is really popular with C++ Builder versus Delphi, whereas other regions prefer Delphi. In situations where somebody has existing C++ code, especially in graphics processing or something along those lines, then that's where you'll see C++ Builder used frequently as well. But most often times it really comes down to taste, what someone's preference. Do they like the curly braces or do they like the verbosity of Object Pascal, being able to make it easier to read like Delphi, or the syntax, some of the syntax quirks of C++. I'll admit I like both. I'm more familiar with Delphi. That tends to be what I use first, but I have learned over the years there are some niceties to C++. And the great thing is, from a technical point of view, generally most things are fairly interchangeable between Delphi and C++ Builder. Some final notes. Most applications use a combination of third-party components and custom components. So using the components that are built into the IDE that ship with the package, as well as third-party components, open source and commercial. It's very rare that I see a project that's not using some sort of open source components if they're using third-party components, and most of them are using third-party components. I think open source components are more common than commercial components, but commercial components are real popular too. It's always great to have an IDE add-in, and everybody's got their favorite. CNPAC seems to be edging out in front as far as the most common one, but a lot of people still use GExperts, Model Maker Express, as well as some of the other ones that are out there, including some by Parnassus. They've got some great plugins there by Dave Millington. This wasn't mentioned in any of the sessions, any of the cool apps we looked at, but source control. Even if you're a team of one, you should be using source control. That's just an aside. Delphi and C++ Builder give your code longer life and greater reach. This is really big. Like when Anders of WIDEORBIT was talking about, they have code that's 20 years old and they're still shipping it. And that code that was originally written for Windows is now running on mobile devices. That's not something you can find with most other development tools. Most other development tools, it's really common that you are rewriting it every few years because it's a new technology that you have to move to. And especially if you're wanting to go to other platforms. Makes it easy to integrate the tools, libraries, and APIs as needed. Anymore, I don't think it's you have the situation where you're in a silo where you're not interacting with other tools, other APIs, and other libraries. All the time we need to be leveraging other stuff, other work, so that we can get more done. And it's all in the details. Pay attention to the details. I'm going to repeat this one again. Pay attention to third-party libraries. If you come to something you need to do, chances are someone else has fought that problem before, and they may have made a component for it. If not, check out like community.embarcadero.com or Stack Overflow or some of the other community sites. FMX Express is the one I love, etc. And see if you can find where somebody else has asked the same question, found a similar problem. If not, hey, post a question on Stack Overflow or community.embarcadero.com and see if you get an answer. And the great thing about that is you leave an artifact for somebody else to discover in the future when they encounter that same problem. Get really familiar with the parallel programming library. I had some other cool apps I wanted to incorporate that use the parallel programming library, but I didn't have time. It's a huge improvement for multi-threading the parallel programming library, and it can result in a greater performance improvement for your application, as well as responsiveness. And that's probably more important than performance. Usually people think multi-threading is all about performance or faster app execution, but realistically, it's about responsive applications. So your application doesn't freeze, the UI doesn't freeze, and the user is able to keep interacting with it. One last note, rapid application development is great for prototyping. I see a lot of people that are able to turn out a prototype really, really quick with Delphi and C++ Builder, but sometimes that prototype will become the product. And so that's when you really want to take the time to refactor your code and think about your architecture to make your code more maintainable. A little bit of effort in the front end can result in a lot more maintainability in the long run. And realize that most of the time your application is going to be maintained for longer than it was developed. So kind of keep that in mind in your development process. So here's that link, embt.co/cool apps webinar 2016. That will take you to the page where you can get links to all the cool apps I've talked about, as well as some others. There's usually videos there, links to their components and such. So check that out. If you have any questions, you can email me, jim.mckeeth@embarcadero.com. I hope you've enjoyed this webinar. It's a little different than usual, but there's so many cool apps out there and they're doing so many cool things. I thought it'd be a great chance to just go over these so that you could learn some from these examples. Thanks so much. And now it's time for questions. I just looked at that list and saw that the FL Studio is not on that list, but if you go to, actually here is the site for FL Studio. It's image-line, and you can go there and find FL Studio. Here's the link. They have a trial. You can download additions. So there's the standard one. This has been a huge project for 18 years. I actually knew people when it was called Fruity Loops. They're like, oh my goodness, this is the best tool ever. And didn't know it was written in Delphi. Now we do. It's amazing. Okay, so let's see if I can find some links for the... Here is the doc wiki page for this. I'll put the link in here for you. Programming library, there is a good place to start. There are also skill sprints. So if you're not familiar with our skill sprints, you can find, here is the list of skill sprints. And there is a ton of short videos out there, as well as elsewhere on our site that you can find more information about different individual topics. Let's see here. If anyone out there is questioning the longevity of Delphi code, I'm compiling 20-year-old code on a daily basis and use exactly the same skills on Android development. Actually, I'm using Delphi 7 and 2001 Berlin or 10.1 Berlin for various items. I recommend Delphi so highly, I can't say it any louder. Well, thank you, Peter. Just saying the skill sprints are such a help. They can't be underestimated. That's good to hear, Peter. Thanks. Thank you so much. You know, and it was interesting that Anders said this was from WIDEORBIT, that he could take code that was written 20 years ago and compile it and run it on Android. And that's so incredibly powerful to be able to do something along those lines, to have that kind of code reused. I was actually thinking about building a, trying to estimate the savings you would have had if you'd written the code in VB back in 1995 versus Delphi, and show how much with VB, in order to get the new versions, you'd be rewriting it and rewriting it and rewriting it in VB.net. Oh, now it's WinForms, and now it's whatever, XAML. So it'd been so much an effort to rewrite it over and over and over again in order to move forward. Whereas with Delphi, you could use the same code, and all of a sudden, look at this, you can take that same code and run it on different platforms. But I decided that would be too complicated to try and actually quantify that information. And it's something that if you've lived that, then you're familiar with that, I'm sure. What does ASP stand for? ASP stands for Association of Software Professionals. And actually, we talked to some of the organizers behind that. We're going to be doing some work with them, because they said Delphi is such a popular choice for members of the ASP, Association of Software Professionals. Are there any plans of improving the speeds of the forums on community? Yes, that's something we're constantly working on. So yes, look forward to that. So there's a question about lower prices for non-commercial educational. Actually, let me look here. There was a special offer going on for Starter Edition. Okay, that's over. But I heard a rumor. So we did have last week, there was a deal where you could get Starter Edition for free, which Starter Edition doesn't include the mobile or database options. But I heard a rumor. Don't tell them I told you, but I heard a rumor we're going to have that offer on Starter Edition really soon again because it was such a huge hit. So anyway, this right here, $280. That's a really good price for a development tool these days, and you can get the promo upgrade from Starter to Pro if you decide you need to go for the Pro features. So there are lots of options for starters. What is the simplest way to migrate a Delphi 5 database using BDE over to FireDAC? Just open and replace. There is a tool called Refind that you can use. Here's a blog post by Marco Cantu, our product manager. We also have a webinar coming up. We've had a number of webinars in the past as well talking about migrating from BDE. GExperts is one. Yeah, I mentioned a lot of them, didn't I? CIMPAC's the other one. The ID add-in, and there's Model Maker Express. Okay, I'll see if I can make a list. So stay tuned to this webpage here, and I will update that with links to all of those. I need to import my image in the blind transition effect in my apps Android. How can I do this? So in order to pull in an image, all you have to do is put down a T-image component, and there is a multi-resolution bitmap component or property, and there's a ellipses there that you can use to load the image in an IDE. Otherwise, you can load it from a file. There's a few ways to that. There's lots of examples. Check out the DocWiki. Okay, a question here. We do not require royalties on sales of apps. That is correct. There are some, if you are embedding Interbase to go, IB to go, which is the full version of Interbase in your application, then there is a per user license. Otherwise, no, you're able to do whatever you want to and get it out there. Peter's also saying, I've upgraded from Delphi 7 Pro through the years to Enterprise 10.1, can now get D7 as Enterprise now that I have 10.1 Enterprise. I want to exploit the REST in my 20-year-old code. Yeah, the new REST components that are available in Delphi, the later versions of Delphi, were introduced in XE7, the REST client components. Oh my goodness, those are so amazing. I'd love to share this story. I was down in Brazil and was meeting with a customer, and ran a huge C# shop, had lots of C# developers, and his boss came to him and said, the CTO said, hey, we need to move to mobile. And he's like, well, we know C#, so let's look at Xamarin. And so he looked at Xamarin, looked at some stuff on it, got a little familiarity. He said, okay, I need to set up some sort of project that I can do with Xamarin to, proof of concept type things. So he said, I'm going to build a simple REST client application. Should take me about a week. So he set aside a week's worth of hours for himself to do this and started working on it. And he was most of a week through it. And he's like, I'm not making much progress. This is really tedious and I'm not getting much done. He was really frustrated, which is why we were there talking to him. I said, I can do that and deploy it to your Android phone in 5 minutes. And he's like, no way. I said, yes, I will connect to a REST client, a REST server, download the code, display it in the user interface, and deploy it to your Android phone in 5 minutes. He didn't believe me. And we didn't actually time it, but it was really close to 5 minutes. Since then, I've actually timed it, and you can do it within 5 minutes, no problem. So easy to do with the REST client components. So take a look at those. Alf's asking if there's demos using events and semaphores using the parallel programming library. We did a skill sprint a while ago. Let me look at the skill sprints list. Yeah, it was a Code Rage session. So, here's a link to it. and you can check this out. This was, I don't know if it does semaphores and events specifically, but it does show some interesting patterns you can do. And I got a lot out of that one, and different ways to use parallel programming library. Nick Hodges' second book covers the parallel programming library quite well. That is true. True. So let me give you a link to Nick Hodges' book, Coding in Delphi. More coding in Delphi. Oh, that's not it. He needs a link from coding in Delphi to more coding in Delphi. There we go. And I have this book sitting right here next to me. It's awesome. There's so many great books coming out for Delphi right now. It's great. Yeah, I'm not sure what you're asking, Steve, but you can certainly do that as far as running there. I actually saw someone that made components for streaming video for Delphi that made it like really easy to just drop that in there. Is there tools for converting from VCL to FireMonkey? So one note is you can. There's the MIDA converter. MIDA? I'm not sure how to pronounce that. I am terrible at pronunciations, even in my native language, so don't even get me started on foreign languages. Check out MIDA converter. And there are others. One note, though, is this: there are tools that make it easy to convert from VCL to FireMonkey, but as was mentioned with the by Eric, is you want to make sure that if you're targeting mobile, that you think about your mobile UI as a mobile UI. And so if you're not planning to convert your UI, MIDA converter is great for converting your UI over, but if you're not planning on tackling the UI, then your rest of your code will convert over no problem. I did check out the doc wiki, Franz. There's a lot of good information in there. I'm not sure if it specifically talks about the FMX styles that you're looking for, but Embarcadero. No. Come on, Ming. I was typically have like 30 tabs open in Chrome. It's like, I'll just use Safari today, but it's got my default search engine set to Bing, and it's not working very well for me. Look in the doc wiki. And actually, there was a Ray Konopka did a webinar, a rad in action on styles. FireMonkey custom styles. Nope, that's not it. There was, let me switch to Google. Ray Konopka did a rad in action that was, I can't connect, come on. All right, take a look for, if you can find Ray Konopka's, he did a session on custom user interfaces, rad in action. I think it was rad in action. And he talked about all sorts of cool things you can do with styles. I learned a lot from that. There's a number of code rages on that as well. And with that, I think we're at the end of our questions. If I didn't get yours answered, I apologize. Feel free to shoot me an email, and I will try my best to get an answer for you. There's my email address for you. There's the link for the information where I'll have the replay on there as well. Sorry about the audio issues we were having. It's probably because I'm sure there's lots of reasons to explain it, but hopefully we'll get those fixed. Definitely have those fixed in the replays and have those hopefully fixed for the sessions later today. So thank you so much. Check out community.embarcadero.com to find out more about the webinars we have coming up. There is one specifically on migrating code that's coming up in the very near future, as well as we have one scheduled with Nick Hodges that will be coming as well. So if you're a fan of Nick Hodges' work, check that one out. And Code Rage is coming in November. So there's that. Lots of good stuff. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for joining us, and we will talk to you later. Bye.